Hey everyone, my name is Viacheslav Bulannikov, and I'm the game director for War Thunder. Today, I'll be answering some of the community's questions.
When will the game's interface be updated?
It'll never be updated. But seriously, in a project of this scale with such a long lifespan, a complete and sudden overhaul of the interface is always extremely stressful, both for the people playing the game and the team working on it. For players, because everything suddenly looks different, which brings mixed feelings and strong feelings as well. Some like it, some don't. For developers, because the interface is enormous. I'm not even sure what the player meant by interface. We have so many different types: in-game, research, and so on. But in any case, it's a massive amount of work, and if you replace it entirely, a huge number of bugs will inevitably appear, all of which need to be fixed. So that's why I say it'll never be updated. Instead, we follow an evolutionary approach to interface development. That means we constantly change and improve individual parts, making things more convenient, adding new features. This way, it's much easier for us to gather feedback from the community on a specific change or feature. And on the other hand, we don't overwhelm players who aren't interested or affected by those changes. So the interface is always evolving. You can actually see how much it's changed over the past year. Just compare your old screenshots if you've been playing for a while. Before and after really tells the story.
Will anti-radar missiles be added?
Yes. The game is getting more and more large SAM systems, which are exactly the kind of targets those missiles are designed for, even though we're a bit skeptical about how effective they'll be compared to other fire-and-forget weapons already in War Thunder. After all, long-range, high-speed missiles of that kind are quite common now. ARMs could still introduce an interesting gameplay mechanic to the game. Besides that, anti-radar missiles could also serve as a way to recon enemy positions. So our plan is as follows. If we add them, we'll refine the interface in such a way so that when you use such a missile, you'll roughly see where the enemy's SAM is located. So yes, we plan to introduce them, I think, most likely in the first half of next year.
Will the survivability of tactical and long-range bomber aircraft improve?
Yes, we're not fully satisfied with how these aircraft are currently set up. Their current parameters aren't realistic enough. They're simply way too fragile, and that makes those planes that are already quite challenging to use even less competitive when facing fighters of their respective battle ratings.
Will we get an artillery sight for indirect fire on SPGs?
Nope, that's not planned. You have to understand, such a sight would look extremely unrealistic, and it wouldn't really fit a game like War Thunder. On top of that, you also have to understand that it wouldn't make indirect fire as easy as some of you might expect. The reason for that is that the main limitation when firing from behind cover isn't the lack of a special sight, it's the trajectory. For most artillery vehicles available in-game, the minimum firing range can actually exceed the size of War Thunder's maps, so that kind of sight just wouldn't help you at all. That said, the game already includes pretty realistic ways to perform indirect fire, if the trajectory actually allows it. You can do artillery spotting using a drone, artillery spotting through another vehicle or an aircraft. You can also set the range manually using the azimuth scale. All the realistic methods are already there, so you can absolutely use those.
Are there any mechanics in the works to improve team play and add more depth to the game?
Yep, there are some ideas we're considering, especially in the context of modern aviation, but for now, it's simply too early to speak about them.
Are you going to fix naval battles?
Over the past few years, we've made a huge number of changes and fixes to naval gameplay. The firing mechanics were overhauled, damage models received major updates, locations were reworked in a big way. Basically, a lot of work has been done. In the upcoming update, which might already be out by the time you see this, we're introducing another major feature related to damage control and ship survivability. So yes, that means we're constantly improving the naval mode, and doing it in parallel with adding new content to naval battles as well, with each update bringing new ships to the game.
When will smoke artillery be added?
We're not planning to add a separate smoke artillery feature. On the one hand, there's no need for it, as the game already has vehicles capable of deploying smoke screens in a variety of different ways. On the other hand, that kind of artillery could easily become a toxic mechanic, and not just a helpful tool. It might end up blocking visibility and interfering with teammates rather than helping them. We've actually tested smoke artillery in special events, even in situations where those events involved players with good communication and coordination. It never gained much popularity in its primary use. More often than not, it simply became a tool for griefing opponents and making gameplay worse for everyone. So we're not planning to introduce standalone smoke artillery anymore.
When will White Rock Fortress return to the game?
This map is currently in active development. There's a good chance we'll bring it back in its updated form before the end of the year.
Remember when you said you won't add top-tier premiums? What happened to that?
We already gave a detailed answer to this back in the summer of 2023. Even though the game now includes premium vehicles of the highest rank, we still don't plan to add top-tier premiums that would be exceptionally effective or strong, better than their peers, in terms of flight characteristics, armament, and so on. The idea is that unlocking top-tier vehicles through the regular tech tree should still offer something new and give you an advantage or capability that even the best premium vehicles don't have. That's why we have no plans to introduce premium vehicles with top-level combat performance.
Air RB enduring confrontation tests were beloved by the community. Can we expect to see Air RB EC in the future?
We're not planning to replace the current Air RB with an RB version of Enduring Confrontation or somehow mix EC into the regular random battles. We've already tried adding EC-style missions to Air RB as a separate event, but they didn't gain much popularity among players. So it's not really our decision, it's just the reality shaped by player experience and preferences. That said, we completely understand that some players are interested in trying something fresh, something new, and we are already working on that something, a new mode in fact. It's called Aerial Warfare.
Are there any plans to introduce more WW2 vehicles to make mid-range BRs more diverse?
I checked. Each year, we add about 30 to 40 vehicles from the first half of the 20th century. Given how many mid-rank vehicles are already in the game and how well those parts of the tech tree are filled out, adding even more vehicles of that era doesn't make much sense. That's why we more often than not use those kinds of vehicles in special events and activities. Still, there are quite a few interesting vehicles from that era that can and will be added over time.
It's insane to see how much of the map is blocked off in the new North Holland map.
Maps aren't actually getting smaller. They're designed to be the size the level designer intended them to be. Every location has a mission variant that uses the full map area. The missions that look smaller than usual, the ones people usually mean, are actually special modes, with just one or a few capture points. The idea behind those specific missions is to offer fast, action-packed gameplay where you can play very aggressively. Both sides clash quickly, fights happen right away, everybody gets frags, and players know where to find the enemy. The time between spawning and spotting your first target is short on purpose. That's why these modes, built with this specific gameplay in mind, use a limited play area. The whole idea is to keep players focused on fighting each other so that they get all that action instead of just spreading out all over the map, because that slows everything down. But that's just one type of mission available to you, so it's not accurate to say that maps themselves are shrinking. In fact, those smaller mission variants have a much lower chance of appearing in matchmaking compared to regular missions, so they're actually quite rare.
Why are copy and paste vehicles added in place of more interesting unique options?
That's a bit of a misconception. We don't add such vehicles instead of unique ones. We add them alongside unique vehicles. There have been many cases where a vehicle appeared on the dev server in one nation's tech tree, even though a case could be made for its inclusion in other tech trees, as they also use the vehicle in real life. Players themselves would then insist that we should add the vehicle to other nations as well. After several rounds of that, we just decided that whenever possible, we'll include those shared vehicles in multiple tech trees right away. That doesn't mean, of course, that we don't have plans to add unique vehicles to the game. Far from it. Those are still being added and more planned. For instance, we've got unique self-propelled artillery vehicles and other vehicles in the works, so we're doing both, shared designs and original ones.
How is work on the World War mode progressing? When can we expect it to launch?
The World War mode is in continuous, steady, though not very fast, development. We share news and updates when we can, and return to work on it from time to time. At the same time, we're currently prioritizing new mechanics and improvements for the main game. In other words, changes that affect the majority of players. Just recently, we talked about our plans for developing aerial warfare and ran several playtests, including SEAD and strategic bombing playtests. In the future, these and similar modes could become special events within the aerial warfare system on the global map. We're planning to test more modes in the same way, as limited-time event missions, so we can collect your feedback, make adjustments, and fix bugs. Once that process is complete, we'll start integrating those missions into a separate, full-fledged mode with operations and a global map. That's when World War, as its own game mode, will officially make its real debut.
There was a test of the PvE mode recently. Are you continuing to work on it?
From time to time, we create unique or themed in-game events to give players something fresh and unusual, a little break from the regular missions and modes. This type of experimental content is probably best represented by our massive April Fool's events, which over the years have really become one of War Thunder's trademarks. Still, every now and then, we just like to have a bit of fun and experiment with smaller events to present something new to players. Such events can be one-time experience, or they might return in the future. Whenever we have news about these or other comebacks, we always share it. One example is the World War mode that we already mentioned, in which players also had to attack fortified positions and AI-controlled convoys, while defending against similar attacks themselves.
Are there any plans for strategic bombers?
We don't have any plans to introduce those aircraft as top-tier vehicles in our current meta. In other words, we don't see them as the pinnacle of aviation development in War Thunder. But as museum pieces, collector's aircraft, or event vehicles, yes, strategic bombers might appear in the game sometime down the line. That's because there's definitely demand for them, and we understand that in certain special modes or simply as rare collectibles, they could be interesting for players. So we're not ruling them out completely.
Can we expect a tighter battle rating spread of 0.7?
Combat strength isn't the only factor that affects gameplay. Variety matters too. If we narrow the BR spread, yes, the vehicles you encounter will be closely matched in terms of their combat capabilities, but the overall diversity of vehicles you encounter will shrink as well. Given that most players tend to gravitate towards meta vehicles, reducing the BR range would mean that you wouldn't even meet the full range of opponents theoretically existing within that smaller range of BRs. On top of that, you have to understand the fact that narrowing the spread could significantly increase matchmaking times. Even though War Thunder has a large player base, especially during peak hours, once you start factoring in things like server region, specific BR ranges, particular nations, or squadrons of several players, all of that together can already result in noticeable queue times. And if we made the range even tighter, wait times could stretch into several minutes, or even dozens of minutes. So the answer is no, we don't plan to change the current BR spread. Instead, we'll continue raising the upper BR limit, gradually achieving a kind of decompression that way.
Any news on the development of submarines?
We're continuing to work on submarines, but implementing such a complicated and controversial type of vehicle takes a lot of time. The biggest challenge is figuring out how to properly integrate submarines, which were never designed for large-scale fleet battles, into the very same fleet battles that basically make up the standard naval experience in War Thunder, and to do it in such a way that we somehow don't break the game for everybody else. We're very grateful to the community and to all submarine enthusiasts for their patience, and we'll do our best to make sure that the final result meets your expectations.
Are there any new game modes in the works? Players are tired of capturing zones.
We think that if players were truly tired of the classic missions with 1 or 3 objectives, they'd have already stopped playing and switched to something else. These modes are classic for a reason. They appeal to players with their simplicity and consistency, letting them focus more on actually fighting the enemy rather than learning some complex mission rules or adapting to unpredictable mechanics. More elaborate missions with intricate objectives that would progress in some complicated fashion could work well with significantly fewer core mechanics or simpler mechanics. But in War Thunder, the scope and speed of what's happening, the sheer depth of vehicle control, and the number of possible actions already demand a lot in terms of player attention. Adding extra layers of complexity within the missions makes things much harder to follow and control. That's why we only introduce such experimental modes as temporary events. Not meant for everyone, but they give players who want that chance to shake things up a bit, have some fun with something that isn't just capturing points, and then return to the good old familiar game modes with renewed vigor.
Are there any changes planned for Squadron battles?
The Squadron Battles mode has gone through several major changes since it was first introduced, evolving alongside the game itself and adapting to ships and player engagement and priorities. Its current state seems stable to us, meeting the needs of players. The rewards for participating in this mode also appear to be well balanced with the effort required, so we're not considering increasing them at this time.
When will we finally get the ability to ban more than one map?
No. Because even right now, players already have the potential to ban up to 32 maps in the worst-case scenario. That's 16 versus 16 players, each banning one map, which removes 32 maps from the pool. And since not all maps are available at every battle rating, this can already exclude more than half the maps we have in certain modes. So even the current ban system already noticeably reduces the variety of locations players see, even if they personally ban just one map. Because of that, we don't think increasing the number of bans would be beneficial. Instead, we're focusing on a variety of measures that prevent players from being placed on the same map several times in a row. Why does that happen? Because the map selection process is utterly random. Even with a well-shuffled map list that avoids immediate repeats, as it works now, there's no guarantee that you won't end up on the same map twice or more in a row. For example, you finish a 17-minute match, wait 3 minutes, queue again, and you get the same mission even though in reality it only reappeared 19 minutes later. Unfortunately, that can happen several times in a row just by chance. It's randomness. It's also important to remember that map bans and dislikes work on top of all that and further reduce the available pool of maps you can be matched on, the pool you're personally drawing from, which amplifies the issue. So we're currently developing a system that takes a player's recent match history into account and filters out maps they or others currently in the queue have recently played. This should reduce significantly the number of streaks, situations where you're placed in the same map several times, 2 or more times in a row. By the way, most of the work on this system is already complete, and we're testing it even on live servers right now. Once we're confident everything's working properly, we'll roll it out everywhere, and, of course, we'll also make a corresponding official announcement.
Is there something planned to improve the player experience of the helicopter PvE game mode?
PvP battles involving helicopters are a very niche experience, something that appeals to a rather small and specific audience. That was clear from the limited popularity of the helicopter PvP mode, so we currently don't have any plans to bring it back in any form. As for dedicated helicopter PvE, we don't have any active or in-progress plans for its additional development right now either. We believe it already offers enough variety in terms of goals, objectives, helicopters with different weapon loadouts. Moreover, since we added the option to research helicopters through ground battles, namely by using the special option of converting earned experience, the relevance of dedicated helicopter PvP has naturally declined. After all, players experience helicopter versus helicopter combat as part of regular mixed battles.
Players leaving after one death in high-tier mixed battles makes this part of the game regularly unenjoyable. Do you have any potential solutions in mind?
Yes, we completely agree that when a large portion of one team leaves after their first deaths, it obviously makes the battle less enjoyable and less fair for everyone else, both your allies and your opponents. But we also understand that players who leave can have legitimate reasons to do that in real life. That's why we're not really eager to introduce some sort of penalty that would force players to stay. Instead, we want to support those who do want to stay, to keep playing but currently can't respawn. For example, because they simply don't have more vehicles available. Maybe they're on a new premium or squadron vehicle, just unlocked a new tier, have only one vehicle for it, and that's it. To help such players, and as a way to solve this problem, at least partially, we've already implemented a system where every premium vehicle comes with a bundle of backups by default. We also announced our plans to implement free daily backups in the latest community update. On top of that, we're exploring other ways to solve the issue, for instance, by adding a random vehicle slot in ground battles, similar to how it works for aircraft in naval battles. That way, players without a suitable vehicle for their current battle rating could still respawn using this special additional slot, where a random vehicle would be provided for them. This would let even single vehicle players respawn more than once, especially when combined with the backup mechanic.
In a PvP game, it's frustrating to be killed by something you can't counter, new FNF missiles. Is this something you consider when adding powerful weaponry?
Yes, we do. However, in any kind of asymmetrical gameplay, situations like this are the natural result of that very asymmetry. For example, a piston-engine aircraft with the bomb engaging a tank without an anti-aircraft gun is an encounter even less fair. In fact, in the game, target-seeking missiles launched from aircraft or helicopters can be very easy to evade, simply by hiding behind cover or deploying smoke. Those same missiles can also be intercepted and destroyed by friendly SPAA or SAM units. Compare that to a simple, unguided bomb dropped from low altitude directly onto a tank, something that constantly happens at mid-ranks. It's often much harder to avoid. That's why the more diverse the lineup in a battle, the greater the variety of vehicles and differences between your vehicle and the ones you run into, the more interesting and varied the encounters themselves can be. Unfortunately, that also means that some of those situations will inevitably feel unfair to one side.
Do you have plans to add regenerative steering into the game?
Implementing a realistic turning system that simulates double differential steering could indeed reduce power loss during turns. However, it would also make vehicles less maneuverable compared to the current turning model, which simulates clutch and brake steering. With such a change, it would no longer be possible to make sharp, high-speed turns by pivoting around a braked track. That's why we're considering whether introducing more realistic turning mechanics would actually be beneficial, like the twin transmission or double differential steering system. In certain situations, these changes would significantly affect vehicle handling in a bad way. We're considering letting players try this out on a public test server first. Based on your feedback, we'll decide whether to implement it in the main game.
There are situations where one team has 4 top BR players and the other 1. This makes the match less fair. Can the matchmaker match these 4 players on either team as a guarantee?
Matchmaking doesn't just limit the number of players with top BR vehicles. It also uses several other rule sets to make matches more balanced. For example, it restricts how large the total BR difference between both teams can be. But it's important to understand that even if you were to play 20 to 30 consecutive matches in perfectly balanced teams, where everyone was using vehicles of the exact same battle rating, even the same model, you would still sometimes stomp the enemy very easily, and sometimes get stomped just as easily. You might end up winning or losing 80% of those matches despite the identical setups, even though everything was perfectly balanced, even though you were all sitting at the same BR using the same vehicle. That's because the outcome of a battle depends not only on the vehicle, but on the players themselves. On the other hand, the stricter the matchmaking rules are, the longer the wait times become. We've mentioned this before. In some cases, it might even become impossible to find a suitable match for certain players at all. As a result, those players would be unable to play and would leave the game for good. What I want to say is that at the end of the day, setting up a matchmaking system is always a compromise between tighter balance, which only partly determines the outcome anyway, and reasonable queue times.
Battle rating changes often cause vehicles that are played by less players to have artificially higher stats. Do you keep this in mind when making BR changes?
If changes to battle ratings were made purely based on server statistics, without any human involvement, that would of course be very convenient. We wouldn't have to spend hundreds of man-hours preparing each update to battle ratings, and we usually do that around 5 times a year. Right now, when adjusting BRs, our game designers start with the statistical data for each vehicle, but they also take into account their own understanding of its strengths and weaknesses. Then we discuss those results as a team. The final step is to compile all of that and try to find a compromise, a balanced collective decision of some sort. After that, we collect player feedback on the implemented changes, and once we have it, the whole process starts again. From the outside, it might sometimes look like certain vehicles receive unfair or insufficient attention. That impression can arise because different groups of players tend to show bias towards particular vehicles, classes of vehicles, nations, etc., something that becomes quite noticeable when analyzing feedback gathered from various platforms. And let's not forget, the game already features almost 3,000 different vehicles. It's entirely possible that something slips through the cracks. That's why we always encourage you to take part in the discussion of BR changes, share your thoughts, agree or disagree with other members of the community. We make every effort to listen carefully to your feedback and take it into account.
When will we finally get proper big maps for MBTs? Or even finally a tank RBSB EC mode?
The game already features ground maps of all kinds of sizes, from 1 by 1 kilometer or a bit larger all the way up to 4 by 4. All of them are equally present in the map rotation pool for high-level tank battles. However, it's important to understand that because players can use the map filter system to exclude locations they don't enjoy, the effective map pool, as I mentioned earlier, can become noticeably smaller. But that's not because of any sort of developer-run dictatorship. We don't have much say here. It's the result of what is effectively honest, democratic voting by the players involved in this game mode. As things stand now, the reality of tank battles at high levels is that most players prefer smaller maps and faster-paced matches, ones that relatively often end with one team being pushed back to its spawn simply because the distances distances between them are so short. Adding extra spawn zones to such maps isn't really feasible. There's simply not enough space. And even if we somehow did that, those new spawns would quickly fall under the control of the dominant team anyway, given how short the engagement distances are.
Will the basement guy ever be released?
I asked you not to include this question. Why is it here?